in 1 hour now. We will hear from President Trump when he travels to the Keystone State, Pennsylvania.
He's set to give remarks on his economic plan, with more than half of voters in a recent poll saying their personal financial situation is not so good. Our D.C. Bureau Chief Ben Kennedy is live in Washington with more. Ben?
Nicole and Calvin, the White House is pushing back on those numbers, saying their plan lowers prices and even creates new jobs. And as you mentioned, President Trump is set to take the stage in about an hour. President Trump hit the road for a swing district in Pennsylvania, a state he won by about 1% in 2024, as he plans to give remarks on the economy, a top issue for voters that could be a key decider in next year's midterms.
We're going to have the greatest economy in history. How many Democrats are retiring?
19 Democrats and 23 Republicans in the House are not seeking re-election, including Florida's rep from the 19th District, Byron Donalds, who is retiring to run for governor, as GOP lawmakers prepare to defend majorities in both chambers come 2026. On social media Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt said best is yet to come with Trump economy. But in a Fox News poll, it shows that 76% feel the national economic conditions are not so good or poor. Same scenario for people's personal financial situation, with less than half surveyed marking excellent good.
Okay, so we need to talk about Trump's Pennsylvania rally, because this event is revealing some serious cracks in Trump's political armor and showing that his signature campaign style might not be working the way it used to. Trump held what was billed as an affordability rally at the Mount Airy Casino Resort in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania. And instead of the massive arena events that defined his political rise and showed his ability to energize huge crowds, this was a smaller indoor event in a conference ballroom with noticeably thinner attendance and less enthusiastic energy than his classic rallies. The optics are terrible for someone whose brand is built on projecting strength and popularity through massive crowds of cheering supporters. When reporters are noting that the venue was significantly smaller than Trump's usual stops, and when the crowd reaction is described as flat and low energy, that's a problem for a politician who needs to maintain an aura of dominance and popularity. The event was supposed to showcase Trump's economic message ahead of the 2026 midterms and demonstrate that he can still deliver for Republican candidates in crucial swing districts. Instead, it's becoming a story about declining rally sizes and a disconnect between Trump's triumphant messaging about the economy and what voters actually experiencing high prices think about his performance. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
It comes one day after President Trump announced relief for U.S. farmers in the form of a $12 billion aid package, with the commander-in-chief saying it'll be funded by tariff proceeds.
In the last year, Biden bankruptcies rose by 55%, having to do with farms. So farm bankruptcies under Joe Biden went up 55%. That's not good.
In most of those funds will be going to crop farmers in the form of a one-time payment. That could happen as early as February, as we now wait for President Trump's remarks tonight.
The choice of venue itself is significant and reveals something about where Trump's political operation is right now. Mount Pocono is in Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district, which is seen as absolutely crucial for Republicans maintaining their already narrow House majority in 2026. This isn't some deep red district where Trump can just show up and get automatic adulation. This is swing territory where Republicans need to persuade independents and moderate voters that Trump's economic policies are actually working. So Trump's team chose to do this event in a casino resort ballroom rather than booking a major arena, which suggests they either couldn't fill a larger venue or deliberately wanted a more intimate setting for testing a new message. Either explanation is problematic. If they couldn't fill an arena, that's a sign that Trump's drawing power has diminished significantly since his peak. If they deliberately chose a smaller venue, it suggests they're worried about embarrassing empty seat photos that would dominate coverage and undermine Trump's strongman image. The decision to go small and indoors rather than big and outdoor is the opposite of what Trump used to do when he was confident about his ability to pack stadiums and create viral moments. The crowd size and energy at the event fell well short of what Trump's rallies are famous for producing. Reporters who've covered Trump rallies for years noted that this Pennsylvania crowd was visibly thinner and less enthusiastic than the classic Trump rally experience, where thousands of supporters would line up hours in advance and create an electric atmosphere of excitement. Instead, this felt more like a routine campaign stop with polite applause rather than the roaring approval Trump typically gets. That change in crowd dynamics matters enormously for Trump's political power because so much of his influence comes from creating the perception that he commands massive popular support that Republican politicians ignore at their peril. When the crowd starts shrinking and the energy starts declining, it raises questions about whether Trump can still deliver the turnout and enthusiasm that down-ballot candidates need to win close elections. Republican members of Congress who are considering whether to stick with Trump or distance themselves from him are absolutely paying attention to these rally metrics as indicators of whether Trump is still a political asset or becoming a liability. The economic message Trump delivered at this rally was recycled material that we've heard many times before, with Trump giving himself an A+++ grade for his handling of the economy and insisting that everything is going great despite what people's actual experiences might tell them. Trump pointed to selective statistics like drops in gas prices and egg prices to argue that his policies are working and that affordability is improving under his leadership. He blamed Democrats for causing the affordability crisis in the first place and positioned himself as the savior who's fixing the problems his opponents created. This is standard Trump economic messaging that plays well with his hardcore supporters who are predisposed to believe everything he says. But the problem is that this message isn't landing with the swing voters and independents who Trump needs to win back if Republicans are going to keep control of Congress. When Trump brags about an A+++ economy, while people in the audience and in the community are complaining that their grocery bills are still 20 to 30% higher than they were a few years ago, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. Local voters who were interviewed before and around the rally gave responses that should terrify Trump's political team because they show how his economic narrative is failing to match people's lived reality. Multiple attendees complained that prices for groceries and basic essentials are still significantly elevated compared to where they were, with some citing increases of 20 to 30% that are eating into their family budgets and forcing them to make difficult choices about spending. These aren't Democratic partisans who are looking for reasons to criticize Trump. These are Pennsylvania voters in a swing district who came to a Trump event, but are still skeptical about whether his economic policies are actually helping them. One independent voter who was interviewed said explicitly that he wouldn't back any Republican tied to Trump because he sees the president as being in it for himself, rather than looking out for regular people. That kind of sentiment is devastating for Trump because it suggests that even people who are willing to give him a hearing aren't convinced by what they're hearing, and some are actively turned off by what they perceive as Trump's self-serving approach to politics. The mismatch between Trump's triumphant rhetoric about economic success and what voters say they're actually experiencing creates the terrible speech framing that makes this rally so problematic for Trump politically. When a president stands up and brags about how great everything is while the audience members are thinking about their struggles to afford basic necessities, the speech comes across as tone-deaf and disconnected from reality. Trump has always been able to maintain strong support from his base even when objective economic indicators were mixed because he's good at creating an emotional connection and making people feel heard. But when he's delivering canned talking points about economic success that don't match what people see in their bank accounts and grocery receipts, that emotional connection breaks down. The speech becomes just another politician telling people not to believe their own experiences, which is exactly the kind of thing Trump used to criticize establishment politicians for doing. The irony of Trump becoming the out-of-touch politician, giving terrible speeches that don't resonate, should not be lost on anyone watching his political evolution. The core problem Trump faces with his economic messaging is that inflation and high prices have been persistent issues that haven't been resolved despite his claims that his policies are fixing everything. Voters have been hearing for over a year that inflation is coming down and that the economy is improving, but what they see when they shop for groceries or pay their utility bills tells a different story. Yes, the rate of price increases has slowed from its peak, but prices themselves remain elevated compared to where they were before the inflation surge. That means families are permanently paying more for basics even after inflation moderates, and that persistent squeeze on household budgets creates economic anxiety that doesn't go away just because politicians insist everything is fine. Trump's strategy of selective statistical cherry-picking, pointing to gas prices dropping while ignoring that overall grocery costs remain high, doesn't work on voters who are making actual purchasing decisions and feeling the pain of elevated prices across the board. The political challenge for Trump is that he can't credibly blame Biden anymore because Trump has been in office long enough that voters are starting to hold him accountable for current conditions rather than giving him credit for inherited trends. Early in Trump's second term, he could plausibly argue that any economic problems were hangovers from the Biden administration and that his policies needed time to work. But as months turn into a year and beyond, that excuse wears thin. If Trump's tariffs and deregulation and tax policies were really going to solve affordability problems, voters would expect to see meaningful improvement by now. When improvement isn't happening or isn't happening fast enough or dramatically enough to offset the pain of high prices, voters start questioning whether Trump's approach is actually working. That shift in accountability from Trump as the fix to Trump as the problem is what Republican strategists should be most worried about heading into 2026. The Pennsylvania venue and crowd size become even more significant when you understand that this was supposed to be a showcase event that demonstrated Trump's political strength in exactly the kind of district Republicans need to hold. PA08 is competitive territory, where both parties have won in recent cycles, and where small margins determine control of the House seat. If Trump can't pack a room and generate enthusiastic crowds in districts like this, it raises serious questions about his coattails and his ability to help down-ballot Republicans win. The contrast with Trump's past stadium-filling rallies is stark and impossible for political observers to miss. There was a time when Trump would announce a rally, and tens of thousands of people would show up, with overflow crowds watching on screens outside the venue. Media would be forced to cover the spectacle of these massive gatherings, which reinforced the narrative that Trump commanded unprecedented popular support. Now we're seeing events in casino ballrooms with noticeably smaller crowds and tepid energy, and the narrative has flipped to questions about whether Trump's rally magic is fading. The implications for Republican congressional candidates who are hitched to Trump are potentially disastrous if this pattern of smaller, lower-energy events continues. House and Senate Republicans in competitive races need high turnout from Trump's base, plus at least some support from swing voters to win their elections. If Trump can't drive that turnout, if his rallies aren't the massive mobilization events they used to be, then those Republican candidates lose a crucial advantage. And if swing voters are showing up to Trump events and leaving unconvinced or even more skeptical than when they arrived, that's even worse because it means Trump is actively hurting rather than helping Republican electoral prospects. Some GOP strategists are reportedly already having quiet conversations about whether Trump should be doing these campaign-style rallies at all, or whether Republican candidates would be better off keeping Trump at arm's length and running on local issues rather than tying themselves to his national message. The broader polling and economic sentiment data backs up what was visible at the Pennsylvania rally in terms of voter frustration with affordability. Surveys consistently show that majorities of Americans think the economy is on the wrong track and that they're worse off financially than they were a few years ago. Consumer confidence remains depressed compared to pre-pandemic levels, and measures of economic anxiety show that people are worried about their ability to maintain their standard of living. These aren't just abstract statistics. They reflect real struggles that families are experiencing with housing costs, food prices, healthcare expenses, and other basics that have gotten more expensive without corresponding wage increases to offset the higher costs. When Trump stands up and says the economy is doing great and gives himself perfect grades, he's telling these struggling families that their lived experiences are wrong or don't matter. That's not a winning political message, and the flat reception he got in Pennsylvania shows that voters aren't buying it. Trump's defensive insistence that Democrats caused the affordability problem and he's fixing it falls apart when you dig into the actual policy timeline. Yes, inflation surged under Biden due to pandemic-related supply chain disruptions and expansive fiscal policy. But Trump's response has been to implement tariffs that raise prices on imported goods, which means consumers pay more for products ranging from electronics to clothing to auto parts. His deregulation agenda might help some businesses, but doesn't directly address the price pressures on consumer goods that are driving affordability concerns. His tax policies primarily benefit corporations and wealthy individuals rather than providing direct relief to middle-class families struggling with high prices. When you look at what Trump has actually done rather than what he claims to have done, it's not clear that his policies should be expected to dramatically improve affordability. The fact that prices remain high shouldn't be surprising given that Trump's agenda doesn't really target the underlying causes of inflation or take meaningful steps to reduce costs for regular people. The 2026 midterm stakes make these weakening Trump rallies particularly significant because control of Congress hangs in the balance, and Republicans have almost no margin for error. Republicans currently have a narrow House majority that could easily flip if they lose just a handful of seats in competitive districts like PA 08. Senate races are also competitive in multiple states, where Trump's coattails could determine whether Republicans maintain or lose their majority. If Trump can't generate enthusiasm and turnout in these crucial races, Republicans could face devastating losses that would cripple Trump's ability to advance his agenda for the remainder of his term. Democratic strategists are already planning to make affordability and Trump's broken promises on the economy central themes of their midterm campaigns, and events like the Pennsylvania rally give them perfect material for attack ads. Imagine the commercials showing Trump bragging about his A+++ economy while cutting to footage of voters at his own rallies complaining that prices are crushing them. That contrast is devastating and very difficult for Republicans to counter. The visual of Trump giving bad speeches to not-so-big crowds in districts that will decide control of Congress is exactly what opponents need to chip away at his strongman brand and make him look weak. Trump's entire political identity is built on projecting dominance, popularity, and winner energy. When the rallies start looking small and sad, when the crowds seem bored or skeptical rather than energized, when the venues are casino ballrooms rather than packed arenas, all of that contributes to a narrative that Trump is declining and that his political power is waning. Once that narrative takes hold, it can become self-fulfilling as supporters start to peel away because they don't want to be associated with a loser. Trump understands this dynamic better than anyone, which is why he's always been so obsessed with crowd sizes and ratings and any metrics that might suggest declining popularity. The Pennsylvania rally represents exactly the kind of event that Trump would have mocked mercilessly if it were a political opponent drawing small crowds. And now he's the one in that position. The question of whether Trump's central re-election argument that he alone can fix affordability is landing becomes crucial as we head deeper into his second term. Trump needs voters to believe that despite current struggles with high prices, his policies will eventually produce prosperity, and that giving up on him now would mean losing out on the economic gains he's promising. But if voters conclude that Trump has had enough time and that his approach isn't working, they'll be open to trying something different, even if that means voting for Democrats they might normally not support. The lukewarm reception in Pennsylvania suggests that Trump's economic message is not automatically landing even with Republicans and swing voters he desperately needs. When independents are saying on camera that they won't support Republicans tied to Trump, that's a warning sign that the Trump brand is becoming toxic in exactly the kinds of districts Republicans need to win. The comparison to Trump's political peak when he could fill stadiums and dominate news cycles with his rally spectacles shows how far he's fallen and how much he's struggling to recapture that magic. There was a time when Trump rallies were must-see events that generated wall-to-wall media coverage and created viral moments that defined the news cycle for days. Supporters would camp out overnight to get into venues, and the atmosphere at these events was electric with genuine enthusiasm and excitement. That energy translated into political power as Republican politicians calculated that aligning with Trump gave them access to his mobilized base, while opposing Trump meant facing those same supporters in primary challenges. Now we're seeing events that feel more like obligation than celebration, where the crowds are smaller, the energy is lower, and the media coverage is focused on what's missing rather than on what Trump is saying. That shift from Trump as spectacle to Trump as routine politician giving mediocre speeches is a massive decline in political potency. The early test of Trump's ability to maintain his coalition and deliver wins for Republican allies is not going well based on what we saw in Pennsylvania. If this event is representative of what Trump's campaign schedule will look like through 2026, Republicans should be very worried about their electoral prospects. The party has bet everything on Trump remaining popular enough to drive turnout and enthusiastic enough to energize the base. If Trump can't do those things, if he's drawing smaller crowds giving lower energy speeches that aren't resonating with swing voters, then Republicans are in serious trouble. Some GOP strategists are probably already gaming out what it would mean to have Trump become a liability rather than an asset, and whether there are ways to gently push him toward a less active campaign role without provoking his wrath. But Trump's ego and his need to be at the center of everything make it nearly impossible to sideline him, even when his involvement might be hurting more than helping. The affordability crisis that voters are experiencing is real and persistent, and no amount of happy talk from Trump about how great the economy is will make it go away. Families are making difficult choices about spending, cutting back on purchases, dipping into savings, or taking on debt to cover expenses that used to be manageable. This financial stress creates political vulnerability for whoever is in power, and increasingly that's Trump rather than Biden or Democrats. If prices remain elevated through the midterms, which seems likely given that there's no magic policy lever that can quickly bring down the structural price increases that have occurred, then Democrats will have a powerful economic argument against Republicans. They can point to Trump's broken promises about fixing affordability and ask voters whether they're actually better off after giving Trump another chance. That's a tough question for Republicans to answer when voters are looking at their bank accounts and grocery receipts and seeing ongoing struggles. The ultimate question is whether Trump and his team recognize that the current approach isn't working and adjust their strategy, or whether they double down on the same messaging and tactics that are falling flat. Trump has never been good at adapting or admitting when something isn't working. His instinct is always to insist that everything is perfect and that any problems are someone else's fault. That stubborn refusal to adjust could be politically fatal if it means Trump keeps giving terrible speeches about economic success to small crowds who are experiencing economic struggle. The disconnect will only get more obvious and more damaging the longer it continues. Republicans who are paying attention to early warning signs like the Pennsylvania rally should be pushing Trump to change his approach, but Trump doesn't typically listen to advice that conflicts with his self-image. That means we're likely to see more events like this one, which means more opportunities for Democrats to contrast Trump's triumphant rhetoric with voter skepticism and shrinking crowds. The Pennsylvania rally might end up being remembered as an early signal that Trump's political dominance was fading and that the 2026 midterms would be much tougher for Republicans than Trump's overconfident messaging would suggest.